John Breslin from HR360 here. I have with me Lillian Shapiro, President of HR360. She will be leading the presentation today. So without any further ado, Lillian, you could take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, John. And thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. We have a large audience out there, and folks are still logging in. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of an introduction, and then we're going to be moving on to our first slide very shortly. First, I want to give you a little bit of background about HR360. We are one of the largest attorney-maintained HR libraries in the country, in addition to providing a range of compliance tools for brokers and their clients. This webinar was developed by our staff attorneys to provide a summary of a number of key areas of ERISA compliance. For those who have access to the HR library, you'll find quite a bit of additional guidance that is stepped out for you and easy to understand. So let's go on to the first slide, John, and let's start our great presentation about complying with ERISA requirements. All right, let's get to the first slide, and here we are. So we're going to be going over a number of different major ERISA requirements, and we're going to start off with just explaining that most private sector health plans are covered by the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Of course, all of us know this as ERISA. Now, ERISA provides protections for participants and beneficiaries in employee benefit plans, including providing access to plan information through a summary plan description, or as many of us know it, an SPD. Also, this is very important, those individuals who manage plans must meet certain standards of conduct under the fiduciary responsibilities specified in the law. Now, what that means, it's kind of a complex sounding word, but in a kind of a simplified form, what we're saying here is these types of responsibilities include managing the plan in the best interests of plan participants and beneficiaries and acting in accordance with the documents governing the plan. So that's key here. So it's not just the idea of providing a group health plan, but really taking those fiduciary responsibilities very, very seriously. So let's move on to the next slide. Thank you, John. So what else is in our entire umbrella of ERISA requirements? First, one that many folks out there know and are well acquainted with is COBRA. Group health plans provided by employers with 20 or more employees are generally subject to COBRA continuation of coverage requirements. Now, if you have access to the HR library, there's an excellent major section on all of the guidance related to qualifying events, who it specifically is eligible, and common mistakes made during COBRA. So there's a lot of information on the HR library. We wanted just for folks out there to understand that it is part of ERISA requirements. Now, by the same token, there are a lot of employers out there who have less than 20 employees. And that means that generally speaking, they're not covered by COBRA, but more than likely, because a very, very large number of states do have state level continuation of coverage with their very own specific requirements related to that particular state for employers who are located in that state who have less than 20 employees in terms of qualifying events and termination of the continuation of coverage and so forth. So it's very, very important for the folks out there to be very familiar and conversant with, if they're a smaller employer, what are their state continuation of benefits coverage. So let's continue on. Certain market reform provisions under the Affordable Care Act, including rules relating to the prohibition of pre-existing condition exclusions, the prohibition of lifetime and annual dollar limits for essential health benefits, the prohibition of rescissions, and required coverage of certain preventive services without cost sharing. Now, all of us have been basically complying with the ACA or Affordable Care Act requirements for quite some time now, but it's worth repeating I'm going to say it one more time later on in the presentation. There's a lot of confusion and concern going on out there in terms of what's happening in Washington and what's going to be happening to the state of the Affordable Care Act. Will it be repealed and replaced or just amended and so forth? But I'm basically here to say one critical point, and that is that every single requirement that is currently in effect is what you must comply with. In other words, if something comes down the road there and then there are amendments and there is potentially repeal, we will let everyone know about it and give the details of exactly what's involved. But until that such time, all of the requirements and all of the penalties, everything currently under the Affordable Care Act is in effect and should be and must be complied with. So continuing on, there is HIPAA, which is covered under ERISA. HIPAA's health coverage and non-discrimination provisions. Particularly, these provisions include rules relating to special enrollment rights and the prohibition of plan participation discrimination against individuals based on health status. Very, very important. So let's continue on. Thanks, John. So what other types of areas does ERISA cover? Here they are. Special health insurance requirements, including Children's Health Insurance Program Reauthorization Act, CHIPRA, Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, Newborns and Mothers Health Protection Act, the Newborns Act, as many of us know, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA. So as you can see, when we say ERISA, it really has a very expansive number of laws and requirements included, and that's very important to remember. And so let's continue on, John. Thank you. Along with various different types of laws, what some of them I've just obviously noted to you, there are different types of ERISA required notices that should be distributed to plan participants and in various cases, beneficiaries. And I'm just going to run through a number of them right now. Very important to remember this because sometimes I think there's a kind of a misconception out there that as long as you've got to provide a good health plan, it's ERISA covered, and everything's in place, you know, the job might be done. But as you can see, just from taking a quick look through these, and I'm going to take them down for you, there are quite a few ERISA required notices that have to be distributed. And I might add, if in the event of a DOL audit, and they happen with a fair degree of frequency out there, two of the areas that they're going to absolutely hone in on in their initial letter that they send, it's typically called an investigation or introductory to an investigation, a letter, it notes all of the different types of requirements that the DOL wants to cover in that particular audit. And summary plan description is absolutely one of them. And in addition to that, there could be any number of these different types of notices. So it's very important to comply, not just because it's a requirement, because in the event of an audit, you want to make sure that the employer is absolutely ready and is doing everything in compliance. So there are all of these various different compliance areas that should really be honed in on and really be complied with. So we've got the summary plan description and plan document. And I might add, there's also confusion about plan document. It sounds like a generic term, plan document, but actually it's not. A plan document has very specific provisions that must be included. It's actually the technical name of the ERISA requirement, as is the summary plan description. Each of these must have a very specific set of provisions as required by ERISA. So if you don't have it, it's an important must-have. I'm going to go into a little bit more about what to do and what's involved with the summary plan description and plan documents in a little bit later on in the presentation. Summary of material modifications, summary of material reduction in covered services or benefits, health insurance exchange notice. And I might add with this one, some folks out there might think that, well, you just have to provide that every year, but it's actually for new employees. So it's just a little bit of an added support for you on that. Employers Children's Health Insurance Program notice, the CHIP notice, general notice of COBRA rights, and of course, COBRA qualifying event notice, notice of special enrollment rights. Let's continue on, Jen. Thank you. Of course, one that we all know and have been implementing for a while under the Affordable Care Act, summary of benefits and coverage, the SBC notice, disclosure of grandfather status, notice of patient protections, wellness program disclosure, Women's Health and Cancer Rights Act notices, Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act notice, Michelle's Law notice, Newborns and Mothers Health Protection Act notice, Medical Child Support Order MCSO notice, of course, and National Medical Support NMS notice. So as you can see, as I take down some of these, what's really, really important to remember is that there are a lot of requirements that really fall under what the employer has to do to stay compliant. And I know in many cases, a lot of brokers out there are helping their employer groups as well, but it's really, really important to be tuned in to all of these various types of requirements. Let's continue on, John. Thank you. Now, I'm going to talk about SPDs and plan documents in particular. We conducted a survey, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, on what was the result of basically whether people understood what an SPD was and what a plan document was. And we had basically sent the survey to over 1,000 brokers. And what came back was the vast majority of the clients, of these employer clients of the brokers, did not really understand what an SPD is and didn't understand what a plan document was. And even if they did, they felt it was too costly to actually comply with. So there's a big compliance gap out there. And so that's why we're taking a little bit of extra time. So ERISA requires plan administrators, typically the employer sponsoring the plan, to provide an SPD to each plan participant. That is the requirement. It must absolutely be delivered to the plan participant, or distributed, if you will. In addition, ERISA covered plans must be maintained in accordance with a written plan document. That's what I mentioned a few moments ago. It is a technical term. I know it sounds so generic, and it is sounding that way, but it's in accordance with the compliance requirements, the provisions as noted by ERISA that should be going into a plan document. That, as mentioned, a lot of employers out there don't comply with an SPD or a plan document requirement. Why? First and foremost, many companies are confused as to what an SPD or plan document includes. And what they're typically thinking, if they do have a sense of it, is that they mistakenly assume that insurance contracts, certificates of insurance, and benefit summaries fulfill the ERISA requirements, but they don't. And here's the thing. On the one hand, these various documents that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, do actually tell the user or the participant what absolutely goes into their particular welfare benefit plan. So there is a certain limited amount of compliance going on, but if that is not accompanied by a WRAP SPD or plan document, which or in the case of plan documents only upon request, but WRAP SPD, which provides all of those provisions that are typically not included, absolutely not included in any of these types of what we call benefit plan component documents, the actual compliance with ERISA is not achieved. So, for example, if an audit happened and an employer says, well, here, an SPD, or a plan document, here's a summary of all the areas of our welfare benefit plan. It covers how it works and everything, and so I should be good, right? That's a summary plan description. I've summarized it. And actually, that would be no. That would actually not pass a DOL audit because there are quite a few required provisions under ERISA that must go into the SPD. So on the one hand, yes, partial compliance is achieved by distributing all of the relevant documents that explain how a plan works, but without those missing ERISA required provisions, that will not pass. So that's why we add in a WRAP SPD, which has all of the provisions that are missing, and then it's distributed along with, of course, all the benefit plan component documents that tell the participant how the plan works. That's how it's achieved. So let's go on. Thank you, John. Now, this is also a source of some misunderstanding out there because there was a little bit of a change, and so we wanted to make it very, very clear what type of penalties are involved. So penalties for noncompliance with ERISA SPD and benefits notices requirements generally include failure to provide an SPD or plan document within 30 days of receiving a request from a plan participant or beneficiary can result in a penalty of up to $110 per day per participant or beneficiary for each violation. So that happens on the 31st day, potentially, okay? It could happen. And so that's the absolute penalty that's on the books. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens or what the DOL wants us to do in the event of an audit, or just what is the philosophy of the DOL, and I'll get to that in a minute. Each failure to provide the DOL with requested documentation, including evidence of benefits notices, is subject to a penalty of up to $149 per day, adjusted for inflation. In addition, failure to provide ERISA required benefits notices can be grounds for legal action by the DOL or plan participants or beneficiaries. So one is very specific, the first bullet, to what happens in a very specific case related to a request from a plan participant or beneficiary of an SPD or plan document. That's your $110 per day. But the second one relates to the DOL requesting documentation. It could be during an audit, it could be for a different occasion, but this is what that penalty of up to $149 per day, that's what relates to the DOL requesting and not receiving documentation, which really can cover a broad range of areas, but they are different and they happen for different reasons. But that being said, the DOL makes it very clear what they want from employers / plan administrators, and the vast majority of employers who have group health, who sponsor group health plans are the plan administrators, is that they want all of those employers to be compliant with, for instance, these, we're on this one, in all ERISA requirements, but particularly these, so that if you don't have it or it hasn't happened, what they're looking for is to make sure that, really, let's talk about this. What's behind all this? They want to make sure that the participant fully understands what is going on as far as your own particular welfare benefit plan. And the only way you're going to really make sure that happens is to have a basic requirement that these two documents, the SPD and plan document, are basically plan document maintained by the employer, and the SPD, of course, with benefit plan component documents, everything to make it clear, is distributed to the participants. They want to make sure the participants understand and know what they are entitled to, what they are eligible for. And that's why this is so important. So they're interested in everybody complying, which is really what this is about. They want to see that protection that is accorded for participants working and in place by providing the proper documentation. So let's continue on. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to just talk very briefly, and I'm going to have John take you through a 5-minute tour of what it's like to actually produce a WRAP, SPD and WRAP plan document. Again, they wrap around the benefit plan component documents like insurance certificates, benefit plan booklets or summaries, and so forth. Our team of attorneys and a major ERISA law firm that we have retained develop and maintain these WRAP templates to provide the provisions necessary to comply with ERISA, as well as folks on the system get email alerts when laws are amended, templates are updated, and so forth. There's also daily consultative and consultative, and tech support, and weekly training and so forth. So, John, I'm going to just have you take it away for a few minutes to see how easy this entire process can be.
Okay, thank you. And if everyone can see my screen here, you'll see I have open the WRAP 360 generator, and we're in the employer plan sponsor information section. So as you can probably assume, this is where you just enter the basic company employer information to get started. So we have here the HR 360 sample company, the address, business entity information, contact person at the employer group, and then we move on to what's called the general plan information. So I will move over there. So this is where we name the general welfare benefit plan. This is where we assign the plan number, the effective date, the plan year for this welfare benefit plan, as well as who acts as the plan administrator, who acts as the agent for service of legal process. And if you follow along as we scroll down, we get to kind of a checklist looking area of the screen where this is where you choose which benefit plans, lines of coverage you wanted to wrap together into this WRAP SPD for this particular employer group. As you can see here, we have a group medical plan checked off. We have a group dental plan. We have a group vision plan. And then we also have a Section 125 premium conversion plan checked off down here as well. And also, as we keep scrolling down, it just quickly asks, Is there a wellness program involved as well? Are there any other participating employer groups that also share this same benefit plan? And then at the bottom, it asks if you'd like to run through the eligibility requirements for this welfare benefit plan. So as you can see here, it's the basic eligibility questions for the plan itself. And I'll move on to what we call the component benefits, which is essentially, as you'll notice, carrier information for each of these lines of coverage that we chose to wrap together. So it starts with the medical, and then you run through that dental, the vision, and the Section 125, all those benefits that we checked off a moment ago. It's just going to ask you the plan name, and then the carrier information. Is it a grandfathered plan? Can they make pre-tax contributions? And then you'll notice at the bottom, it's going to ask about eligibility one more time. This is asking if this medical plan has its own unique specific set of eligibility requirements. You can always bring up those questions again, run through those answers, and it would just be unique to this medical plan alone. And then you just run through the same process for that dental and for that vision plan, and a couple quick questions for that Section 125 premium conversion plan. And then once you run through that basic carrier information, you can hit the review and generate button on the top right here, the green button on the top right. So this takes you to the final screen where you can review all of the information that you just went through to build the SPD and the plan document. You can edit anything, see when it was last updated. And as we scroll down a little bit more, these 4 boxes are where you format and build the wrap SPD and plan document themselves. You can generate it in a PDF or Word file. It's going to ask if you'd like to generate both the wraps and the Section 125 documents, or just the wraps, just the POP documents, English or Spanish. Foreign language assistance notices can be included for any of these languages below. But then all you would have to do is go ahead and hit Generate Wrap Documents. And as soon as you do that, you'll notice right below all of the documents for this sample company are generated. So we have our wrap SPD, we have our wrap plan document, we have those Section 125 POP plan documents available right down here. And then we'll also give you these extra distribution documents. You don't have to do anything extra to generate them. They always get generated for your employers. So those would be the guidelines for SPD distribution, who needs to get it, when they get it by, how it should be distributed, and also the employee acknowledgement of receipt of the SPD. It's a form that the plan participants can sign when they do receive their wrap SPD, just so the employer can keep it on file for proof that it was distributed on time. And then we always also give you a downloadable zip file, which automatically contains everything that you just generated for this particular employer. But other than, attaching these documents to an email, printing them out, getting them over to your clients themselves, you can also use this email link to wrap documents or copy link to wrap documents feature. So this would actually take your clients and their employees to kind of like a standalone employer-employee portal where they can view and download their documents. So I have that open right up here for this particular client. So here you can see this is what the employees, the plan participants themselves would see. It gives the name of the company, quick statement about what you're giving them, what's included in this screen for them to download. And then you'll notice those same documents that we just chose to generate are available for the employees themselves to log in and download on their own. So you don't have to, print out the paper, give it to each of those employees. You can just send them to this employee portal. They get the statement, they view the documents, and they can go ahead and download them on their own.
All right, thanks, John. I think we're going to move on to the next slide right now. So I think that's great. The point of what we are, and we can move on to the next slide. The point of what we are basically saying here, and we're going to show you one other tool that generates benefits notices in a very short amount of time, is that because, years ago, it was always a very difficult thing to do SPDs and plan documents, very, very, very costly in terms of what was involved and so forth. And it's just so different now with platforms that are managed in terms of the compliance by in-house attorneys, ERISA law firms, and so forth. It is so much easier to be in compliance now than it's ever been, ever. So really that's something very, very important to think about in terms of just making sure each and every employer out there is in compliance and doing the right thing. The other area that we want to show you, again, it'll take about 2 minutes, is that there's a whole painful way of basically, remember I talked about all those notices, you know, basically you can find a link somewhere along the way that will link to a model notice if there's available one, or sometimes there isn't one for some of these notices, and it's really a couple of paragraphs that's in a provision of that particular law. And so providing the required notices is really also a pretty difficult task all in all, because of so many, and they're all spread out in so many different areas if you can't find them on governmental sites or agencies. So what do you do to stay in compliance or make sure the employers are really doing what they need to do in terms of required benefits notices? We have our benefits notices 360, which basically integrates with the WRAP product that you saw. So about 18 or 19 items are auto-filled from when the WRAP is done, and they immediately go into this system. And you answer a number of key questions, one of which is how large the employer is, how many employees, because the system is basically intelligent. It will then start asking questions based on some fundamental criteria, like the number of employees in a particular company and certain aspects of their own particular welfare benefit plan. And then within a small matter of time, a single document, whether Word or PDF, gets generated with all of the required benefits notices based on the information given and so forth. And that is a godsend for a lot of folks out there, because they will be ready. They will have their packet of notices, whether it's this system or any other way that you can do it quickly and efficiently. That's really what you want to do, especially with the many new plan years starting. And hopefully everybody's going to get off to a great start with new plan years and enrollment and all that great stuff. So very, very important to think about. I'm going to actually turn it over to you for another few minutes just to quickly take us through what something like that looks like, John. Thanks.
Absolutely. So you'll see, I'll just scroll back up. The benefit notices generator is available on the left-hand navigation bar. I also have it open in my my browser up top here. So you just go ahead and choose which client, which employer you'd like to generate those benefit notices for. So as I open it up, you'll see, as Lillian mentioned, I'll just go back to the first step here. All of that employer information has been pulled over to the notices generator, so you don't have to run through this information a second time for this client. The only questions you do have to answer are the size, as Lillian mentioned. Is it 1 to 19, 20 to 49, 50 and over? And then the easiest question, do you offer a group health plan to some or all employees? And then once you hit the next button here, you'll notice it'll run you through the different questions involved to populate each of these benefit notices. So first question, very easy. What is the name of that welfare benefit plan for this particular client? And then you'll see right below that, it just runs through in order the different notices that you can auto-populate with this system here. So it starts with the summary of material reduction in covered services. And then as you keep scrolling down, it's going to ask us about the health insurance exchange notice, some quick questions to populate that exchange notice. Then through grandfathered status. Is it a grandfathered plan? We'll say yes. Notice of patient protections is next. Again, just some kind of sub-questions to populate that notice for your employer. Notice of special enrollment rights is next. And then down to wellness program disclosure. Down to notice of privacy practices. As we keep scrolling down, we get down to the Women's Health and Cancer Rights Act notices, Mental Health Parity Addiction Equity Act, Michelle's Law, Newborn and Mother's Health Protection Act notice. And as we get towards the bottom, we get down to the Medicare Part D creditable or non-creditable coverage notice, the ADA notice regarding wellness programs, as you can see, only applicable to employers with 15 and over. And we finish it off with the general notice of COBRA rights. And then finally, the ACA Section 1557 non-discrimination notice. And then once you go through all these questions for this company, you go ahead and hit this next button one more time. And you'll see it's going to take you to the next screen, which we call Select Notices. So what Select Notices does is it allows you to either generate all of these notices that we went through at once. If you want to say select all, it'll include a table of contents, a cover page, the Spanish version of these notices where they are available. But you do also have the ability to generate individual notices as well. So if you wanted to come back and only regenerate this one and that one, if you made some changes, you can always do that as well. You don't have to generate them all at once. For our example, we'll hit select all and then hit next one last time. And then it's just going to take us to this fourth stage, which we call output benefit notices, where, as you can see, you just simply can save all of these notices as a Word file, save them as a PDF, or you can also download those distribution guidelines for each of those notices that you went through. And I do have an example open up here. So here is that benefit notices packet that we just built for this sample company. Starts with that cover page, and then that table of contents. And then you'll see it'll just run through those notices that we just went through in the system here. You can see everything is auto-populated.
No, that's great, John. I think everybody kind of gets a good sense of that. So again, whatever system you might be considering using or whatever you would like to use, the key here is that how can employers comply with so many of these different types of ERISA requirements in an efficient way, and there absolutely are solutions out there. So let's continue on. Thank you very much, John. To the next slide.
All right.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the Affordable Care Act, or ACA, I like to call it ACA compliance, which is under ERISA, and then we're going to just jump right into some of the key areas that we want to touch on today. So I had mentioned this at the beginning, but it's purposefully here in the slide deck. So we're going to, by the way, send everybody a copy of the slide presentation after so that you have it to refer back to. But as mentioned, repeatedly, there have been attempts at replacing the ACA, and it's not been successful. There's something new, again, that they're thinking about right now, but it, you know, in terms of state block grants and so forth. But if and when anything at all happens, same law, same requirements, nothing changes, same penalties. So it's very, very important to keep thinking and understanding and knowing that everything is still in effect, and to please wait before anybody kind of thinks, well, do I have to do this or not? You do have to do it. There are still penalties. And as soon as anything changes, HR 360 will be out there explaining in detail what and if and when any types of amendments or replacements might be out there and or going into effect. So let's continue on. Thanks, John. So now we're going to talk about ACA's pay or play provisions. Two provisions of the ACA apply only to applicable large employers. What do we mean by that? If an employer has 50 or more full-time employees, including full-time equivalent employees on average during the prior year, the employer is an applicable large employer for the current calendar year. Now, coverage requirement, commonly referred to as pay or play, a lot of us know it as that, offer affordable coverage that provides minimum value to all full-time employees and their dependents, if there are dependents. And we're going to talk about what does minimum value mean momentarily. Now, what's the information reporting requirement? File forms 1094C and 1095C with the IRS, and furnish form 1095C to full-time employees. Failure to comply with these requirements can result in substantial tax penalties. So it's very, very important to remember that these are all requirements that are still in effect. They're on the books, and they must be complied with. I have confidence that all the folks out there who are applicable large employers, or hopefully they have all their information together and they have done, you know, the proper information requirements and submitting it to the IRS and so forth. Employers, just to be sure that everybody understands this, employers with fewer than 50 full-time employees or full-time equivalent employees are generally not subject to pay or play. So if you've got less than 50, that's critical in terms of what types of ACA or ACA requirements must be complied with. So that's very important if you are considered a small employer. So let's continue on. Thanks, John. So we mentioned, what is affordable coverage? You know, it's definitely a requirement, but what is it? For calendar year 2017, coverage is generally considered affordable if the amount the employee contributes towards his or her own coverage does not exceed 9.69% of his or her household income. So again, what's considered affordable? If the amount the employee contributes towards his or her own coverage does not exceed 9.69% of his or her household income. So moving on from that, there are some safe harbors, meaning there's, I don't want to say exactly exceptions, but really the technical term is safe harbors or options or explanation provided that explain things a little bit differently. And so here's a very important Form W-2 safe harbor. Because employers generally do not know their employees' household incomes, think about it, we don't know that for sure. There are several optional affordability safe harbors available to determine affordability. The most notable safe harbor is the Form W-2 safe harbor. Under this safe harbor, if the employee's contribution towards his or own coverage is less than, very important now, 9.69% of his or her Form W-2 wages, the coverage offered is deemed affordable for purposes of pay or play. So there you go. It's the Form W-2 safe harbor. So let's continue on, John. Thank you. Continuing on with what is minimum value coverage. A plan provides minimum value if it covers at least 60% of the total allowed cost of benefits that are expected to be incurred under the plan. So remember, it is considered minimum value coverage if at least 60% of that total allowed cost of benefits that are expected to be incurred under this plan. At least 60% is key. Provide substantial coverage of inpatient hospitalization services and provide substantial coverage of physician services. So this is the description of what minimum value is. And again, it will be going out to you as a PDF version of this presentation. And I might add, in addition, there is a minimum value calculator from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, and it's available online. But that being said, again, if you have access to the HR library, there is excellent expanded information in this regard that we think is very, very important for you to review. In other words, we've opened it up to you. We've given you some very, very key aspects of this, but it's also important to just get into the easy to use HR library because it's got some really excellent information that guides you right through it. So let's continue on. And let's talk about pay or play penalties. In general, an applicable large employer will owe a pay or play coverage penalty under one of these two scenarios. And what are they? This one, the first one's very, it could be very onerous. Applicable large employer does not offer coverage. So they're applicable large employer, right? And they don't offer coverage to at least 95% of its full-time employees and their dependents, and at least one full-time employee receives a premium tax credit to purchase individual coverage through the health insurance marketplace. All right. So generally, this large employer is not offering coverage to at least 95% of its full-time employees and dependents. And then, of course, that one full-time employee receives a premium tax credit purchase and individual coverage through the health insurance marketplace. Under this scenario, an applicable large employer may owe a penalty of $2,260 per full-time employee. That is a very, very steep penalty. So it's important to think about this and to understand what the ramifications are of this penalty. Now, the second one, which we believe is a far more common one, applicable large employer offers coverage to at least 95% of its full-time employees and their dependents. So this plan, the employer B is actually trying to do the right thing, right? And they're offering the coverage to at least 95% of its full-time employees, but at least one full-time employee receives a premium tax credit to purchase individual coverage through the health insurance marketplace because he or she was not offered coverage that was affordable or provided minimum value. So if the definitions that we just outlined were not met as far as affordable or minimum value, under this scenario, an applicable large employer may owe a penalty of $3,390 for each full-time employee that received a premium tax credit. So it's more narrow than the first, but again, the law is so specific. As you can see, that's why compliance is still necessary. It's still the law on the books. The IRS, clearly has stated what the tax penalties are, as does the law. And so bottom line is that it's important to be compliant until anything has changed, nothing has changed. So everything must be adhered to and complied with to avoid these kinds of penalties. Let's continue on. Thanks. Now we're going to talk a little bit about information reporting requirements and penalties. In general, an applicable large employer is required to annually file information returns. A lot of folks out there, I'm sure, have been doing it for a while, with the IRS and furnish information returns to its full-time employees as follows. File forms 1094C and 1095C with the IRS. Furnish a form 1095C to each full-time employee. Ready? What's the penalty? Failing to comply with these information reporting requirements may result in penalties of up to $260 per return. The insurer, this is a special note, the insurer must file and furnish information returns for employers that are fully insured and not applicable large employers. Very, very important to remember that. So let's continue on. Now we're going to talk about other group health plan rules. Eligibility. What is that all about? General eligibility rules. By the way, there was a time way back in the day when folks basically would get eligibility rules from the carrier. For the most part, that really doesn't happen quite often anymore. So we really have to know, how do we communicate eligibility rules to the participants and ultimately and also the beneficiaries. Employers are generally free to set the eligibility rules for their group health plans so long as employees are provided sufficient notice of the eligibility rules in accordance with ERISA, as we mentioned, via summary plan descriptions, or if there are changes or anything like that, summary of material modifications. And we want to make sure those rules do not unlawfully discriminate. So they cannot discriminate against certain employees. Very, very important when developing the eligibility rules. Applicable large employers should also consider any potential pay or play implications when designing eligibility rules. For example, employees working 30 hours or more per week may trigger a pay or a pay or play penalty for the applicable large employer if not offered coverage. So very, very important to remember that it's got to be in sync with the pay or play rules. So let's continue on. Thank you. Now we're going to talk about Section 125. Health benefits offered as part of a cafeteria plan. And that's a plan which meets specific requirements to allow employees to receive certain benefits on a pre-tax basis, are generally subject to the non-discrimination requirements of Internal Revenue Code Section 125. Cafeteria plans are also commonly referred to as premium-only plans, POPs, or premium conversion plans, PCPs. So it's known by kind of different acronyms there. In addition, the following tax-favored arrangements are also subject to these non-discrimination rules. Your health FSAs, your HSAs, and your dependent care FSAs. Very important to remember this Section 125 rule. I'm going to explain it a little bit more in detail. Let's continue on. To comply with the Section 125 non-discrimination rules, a plan generally must satisfy these three tests. Eligibility test: the plan may not discriminate in favor of highly compensated individuals as to eligibility to participate. Benefits and contributions test: the plan may not discriminate in favor of highly compensated participants as to benefits and contributions. And finally, key employee concentration test: The non-taxable benefits provided to key employees may not exceed 25% of the non-taxable benefits provided for all employees under the cafeteria plan. So these are very specific tests. And just a word of guidance here, each and every, and our ERISA law firm, the Wagner Law Group, has emphasized this over and over again. They specialize in this entire area. It's important to note that every employer is different. If you may see out there some kind of a template that might be floating around, whether somebody Googled it or somebody passed it around, that is really, really not the thing to do. If testing is needed, the employer should absolutely have a relationship with someone who specializes in testing. There's some online platforms out there that we've seen, but the key thing that we're saying is don't kind of find if there is a template out there, because we get asked this question a lot, and they're going, oh, can't you just give me something that'll just do the job? And that would not be prudent and would not be fair to the employer. So again, we're emphasizing, make sure that you have a proper testing organization, professional organization that can do this properly. There's so much at stake, and that should be done absolutely by experts. Let's continue on. Now we're going to talk about Section 105 rules. Under Section 105 of the Internal Revenue Code, separate non-discrimination rules apply to self-insured plans, including self-insured group health plans, of course, HRAs, and health FSAs. So in effect, with the health FSA, they're also subject to the Section 125 rules mentioned in the preceding slides. So it's important to note that what you're dealing with here is a little, more testing when it comes to health FSAs. And with that being said, it's important to also note that what's going on, again, is just that emphasis on please make sure that proper professional, if testing obviously needed for a particular employer, whether the broker is involved with this or the employer is doing it directly, that you get an expert in this area to make sure it's being done properly. Let's continue. Thanks. Now, how do you comply with Section 105 non-discrimination rules? A plan generally must satisfy two tests. Eligibility test: the plan may not discriminate in favor of highly compensated individuals as to eligibility to participate, and the benefits test. Benefits provided under the plan must not discriminate in favor of participants who are highly compensated individuals. Okay, different testing, different rules. The terms highly compensated participant, highly compensated individual, and key employee have specific and distinct legal definitions. It isn't just something intuitive. It's part of the requirement. For more information, you can certainly go to the irs.gov site and use their own search engine on that particular site. But again, if you have access to the HR library, we absolutely cover all that in more detail. And again, very important to get up to speed on that. Let's continue. Thanks, John. So now let's talk about HIPAA classing. This, again, is a question we get a lot. Under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, of course, HIPAA, an individual cannot be denied eligibility for benefits or charge more for coverage because of any health factor. And what are the health factors? What do they include? Health status, medical condition, claims experience, receipt of health care, medical history, genetic information, evidence of insurability, disability. Cannot be discriminated against, and they can't be denied eligibility for benefits or charge more because of these factors. Let's continue on. Thanks, John. However, HIPAA allows distinctions among groups of similarly situated participants in a health plan based on bona fide employee-based classifications that are consistent with the employer's usual business practice. Now, so again, classing is a big question. So basically what's being said here is that there are certain classes or classifications that, as long as they're consistent with the employer's usual business practice and therefore similarly situated participants, that can be allowed. So what are they? Some of the examples of different types of classifications: full-time versus part-time status, different geographic locations, dates of hire, length of service, current employee versus former employee status, different occupations, membership in a collective bargaining unit. So again, these are the potential for viable classifications. But again, what you want to do always is double check it again if you have access to the library. But these are the basic classifications and that fit this particular circumstance in terms of being similarly situated participants. And the health plan is based on what is considered here a bona fide employment-based classification. And by the way, when we say consistent with the employer's usual business practice, if suddenly this is coming out of left field and there's almost a feeling of, well, I'm just going to try to do something just to try to get out from under here. Again, that's why they say employer's usual business practice. Is this typically how the employer has been conducting and segmenting various employees in their particular company? So that's important to note also. Let's continue on. Non-discrimination rules for older employees. The following are non-discrimination rules, particularly that will apply to older employees. Group health plans of employers with 20 or more employees are required by law to offer workers and their spouses who are age 65 or older the same health benefits that are provided to younger employees. Okay, it's just that simple. Don't discriminate. In addition, various federal, state, and local workplace non-discrimination laws prohibit discrimination in the provision of benefits based on age for individual 40 or older. So again, you want to also check state law for workplace non-discrimination. Very important because we're covering federal right now. The only other thing I ever mentioned in state was laws related to continuation of benefits, typically for employers under 20 employees, 19 and under. So it's very important in all instances to check the state laws on this to make sure all bases are covered. So let's continue on. All right. So basically, that ends our presentation for today. I am going to take 2 questions. I see them coming in. And the rest, if there are some questions we can get back to you on, we will be emailing out additional tools and information as I promised. And if there's some question that you may have, please reply back. We're more than happy to really talk to you and see what's on your mind as well. First question, when do I need to provide employees with an SPD? Summary plan description. Employers must provide an SPD within 90 days after the employee becomes a participant in the group health plan. Now, as a result, we encourage employers to prepare SPDs during an open enrollment so that they do not forget this important and potentially costly notice requirement. Remember, the failure to provide an SPD upon request could be as high as $110 per day per plan participant or beneficiary. So those guidelines are very, very real. And best practices, why not add open enrollment or post, I should say, open enrollment. But it's important to do that as soon as possible. The next question, a lot of people have asked us about this, I see. When are Forms 1095-C due to employees in 2018? What is going on next year? As of right now, and emphasis is as of currently, the 2018 deadline to furnish Forms 1095-C to full-time employees is January 31, 2018. On these forms, employers will provide information on coverage provided in calendar year 2017. Unfortunately, the forms for calendar year 2017 reporting are not available yet. We don't have the final in place. The government has not provided it as yet. However, the forms should be released in the coming weeks. That is our understanding, and we'll be sure to bring them to you as soon as possible. And of course, HR 360 will release them as soon as we know they're out there. So that wraps it up for today. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for a PDF version of the presentation, and stay tuned for new webinars coming up. Thanks a lot, folks.